My boyfriend said I was just for fun after 5 years together, while his ex was marriage material. His cousin proposed 6 months later. Ryan and I had been together for 5 years and lived in the same apartment for 3. We split rent, had a shared bank account for bills, and his family invited me to every holiday like I was already part of the family. His mom called me her future daughter-in-law at every family dinner, and Ryan would just smile and squeeze my hand. We'd talked about marriage plenty of times, and he always said he wanted to do it right, save up for a nice ring and proposal that I deserved. I believed him because why wouldn't I after 5 years of building a life together? Everything was perfect, until his cousin Ethan came back from working overseas, and they had their big reunion night out. I was supposed to go, but got called into a work emergency last minute. Ryan said he'd be home early since it was just catching up with Ethan and a few old friends. He didn't come home until 4 in the morning, completely wasted. The next day, Ethan added me on social media and started being really friendly, commenting on my posts and sending funny memes. Ryan said Ethan was always like that, super social and friendly with everyone. I thought it was nice that his cousin wanted to get to know me better. 2 weeks later, we were at Ryan's friend Todd's barbecue, and I went inside to grab more drinks from the kitchen. The window was open and I could hear the guys talking on the patio. Todd was asking Ryan when he was finally going to propose since we'd been together forever. Ryan laughed and said marriage was for girls you wanted to build something real with, not girls like me who were just for fun. He actually said I was a good time but not wife material. His friend asked what that meant, and Ryan said some girls you date and some girls you marry, and he'd already met the girl he wanted to marry back in college, his first girlfriend Alyssa, who dumped him sophomore year. He said he still checked her social media every day, and that she was the one who got away. He said I was convenient and fun, but when Alyssa was ready to settle down, he'd be there waiting. They all laughed about how I kept dropping hints about rings and wedding venues while Ryan was just running out the clock. I stood in that kitchen holding beer bottles while my whole relationship crumbled in my head. 5 years of my life with someone who saw me as a placeholder. Every I love you was a lie. Every future plan we made was just him killing time. I walked back outside and acted completely normal. Handed out the beers, sat next to Ryan like nothing happened. He put his arm around me and I let him, even though my skin was crawling. That night I started planning. First, I stopped doing all the girlfriend things Ryan had gotten used to. No more packing his lunch, no more doing his laundry with mine, no more scheduling his appointments or reminding him about his mom's birthday. Ethan kept texting me funny stuff and I started responding more, having actual conversations. He'd ask about my day and remember things I told him. He complimented my promotion at work while Ryan hadn't even noticed I'd gotten one. When Ethan asked if I wanted to grab coffee and catch up since we barely knew each other despite me dating Ryan for years, I said yes. We met up and talked for 3 hours. He told me he'd been impressed with how I handled Ryan's family, especially his difficult sister who hated everyone. He said Ryan was lucky to have someone so patient and understanding. I almost cried because it was the first time in months someone had said something nice about me as a partner. We started having coffee every week, then lunch, then dinner when Ryan was working late, which was always. Ethan would pick restaurants I mentioned wanting to try, remember how I liked my coffee, ask about presentations I was nervous about. Everything Ryan should have been doing but wasn't. After 2 months of this, Ethan told me he had feelings for me. He said he knew it was complicated with Ryan, but he couldn't watch his cousin waste what they had. He said Ryan talked about me like I was temporary, and it made him sick because I deserved someone who saw me as their future, not their placeholder. He said he'd been in love with me since that first family dinner where I helped his grandmother with her walker without being asked. That night I went home and told Ryan we needed to talk. I said I knew about his conversation at Todd's barbecue, about Alyssa, about me being just for fun. His face went white and he started scrambling, saying it was just guy talk, that he didn't mean it, that he loved me. I asked him to propose right then if he loved me. He said he wasn't ready. After 5 years, he wasn't ready. I packed my stuff that night. Ethan helped me move into my new apartment the next day. Ryan called and texted nonstop, saying we could work it out, that he'd change, that he'd propose if that's what I wanted. A month later, Ethan and I were officially together. Ryan lost his mind when he found out at the next family dinner. Ryan's chair scraped against the floor so loud everyone stopped talking mid-sentence. He stood up fast enough that his water glass tipped over and spilled across the white tablecloth. His face was red and his hands were shaking as he pointed at Ethan and me sitting together on the other side of the table. Ethan's hand found mine under the table and squeezed gently, calm and steady, while Ryan started yelling about how we betrayed him and stabbed him in the back. His mom looked confused at first, glancing between the 3 of us like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then her eyes landed on our joined hands under the table, and her expression shifted to understanding. His dad set down his fork and told Ryan to sit down and lower his voice because they were having a family dinner. Ryan ignored him completely and kept yelling. Ryan announced to the entire table that I left him for his cousin, making it sound like I cheated on him while we were still together. He said Ethan swooped in and stole his girlfriend and destroyed their family. Several people gasped and Ryan's aunt covered her mouth with her napkin. I felt my stomach drop because he was twisting the whole story to make himself the victim. Ethan let go of my hand and stood up slowly, not aggressive but firm. He looked Ryan in the eye and said that I was single when they started dating. He explained that I broke up with Ryan a month before, that I moved out and ended things completely before anything happened between us. Ethan's voice stayed level and calm, while he told Ryan he needed to accept that we were together now and stop making scenes. Ryan's face got even redder and he called Ethan a liar. Then Cheryl stood up from her seat near the end of the table. I braced myself because Cheryl had never liked me when I dated Ryan. She made comments about my clothes and my job and acted cold at every family event. But she looked at Ryan with this disgusted expression and told him to stop embarrassing himself. She said she always knew he didn't appreciate what he had with me. She said I was patient and kind and dealt with their difficult family better than anyone, and she was glad I found someone who actually valued me. She looked at me and said Ethan was lucky to have me and she hoped we'd be happy together. My mouth literally fell open because I never expected Cheryl to defend me. Ryan started yelling at his sister now, calling her a traitor too. His mom stood up and told both of them to stop it right now. Ryan's mom grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the kitchen. I followed her past the dining room and through the swinging door into the bright kitchen that smelled like roasted chicken. She turned to face me with worried eyes and asked what really happened between Ryan and me. Her voice was gentle, but I could tell she needed to understand. I took a breath and told her about Todd's barbecue, about going inside for drinks and hearing Ryan through the open window. I explained how he told his friends I was just for fun, not wife material, that he was waiting for his ex Alyssa to be ready to settle down. I watched her face change as I talked. Her eyes got shiny with tears and her hand went to her mouth. She looked like I'd just told her someone died. I explained that after 5 years of him calling me his future, finding out I was just a placeholder broke something in me that couldn't be fixed. She pulled me into a hug right there in the kitchen. She was shorter than me, so my chin rested on top of her head. She said she was so sorry for how Ryan treated me. She said she genuinely thought we would get married and she'd been planning what to wear to our wedding in her head. She pulled back and held my shoulders, looking right at me with tears running down her cheeks. She told me she was hurt that her son wasted 5 years of my life when I gave him everything. She said she understood completely why I moved on, and she didn't blame me one bit for finding happiness with Ethan. She said Ethan was a good man who would treat me right. I was crying too by then, and we hugged again. Through the kitchen door, I could hear Ryan still yelling in the dining room. A door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Ryan's car engine roared to life in the driveway and then tires squealed as he peeled out onto the street. The sound faded as he drove away too fast. Ryan's mom and I walked back into the dining room where everyone sat in uncomfortable silence. Then Eric, Ethan's older brother, leaned back in his chair and said Ryan always was dramatic when things didn't go his way. A few people laughed nervously and some of the tension broke. So Ethan's dad made a joke about Ryan probably going to drive around and cool off. People started picking up their forks again and passing dishes. The dinner kept going, but everything felt awkward and forced. Ethan's family made a real effort to include me in conversations like nothing weird had just happened. His aunt asked about my job and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. His uncle talked about a restaurant he thought Ethan and I should try. Ryan's grandmother, who I'd helped with her walker at past dinners, reached over and patted my hand with her wrinkled one. She said she was glad I was sticking around the family. She said she could tell I was good people from the first time we met. I squeezed her hand back and felt grateful that at least some of Ryan's family was on my side. The next week was bad. Ryan sent me text after text, dozens of them at all hours. Some of them begged me to come back and said we could work things out. Others called me horrible names for dating his cousin. He said I was using Ethan to get back at him. He said I never really loved him. He said I was destroying his family. The texts got meaner as the week went on. I saved screenshots of all of them on my phone in case I needed proof later. Then I blocked his number and felt immediate relief when my phone finally stayed quiet. Ryan started posting things on social media. He never mentioned me or Ethan by name, but it was obvious what he meant. He posted about betrayal and how family should be loyal. He posted quotes about snakes in the grass and people showing their true colors. He shared articles about moving on from toxic people. I saw them because mutual friends kept sending me screenshots. Ethan never looked at any of it. When I showed him some of the posts, he just shrugged and said Ryan could post whatever he wanted. He said getting worked up about it would just give Ryan what he wanted. I found that so attractive compared to Ryan's constant need for drama and attention. Ethan just focused on us and our relationship instead of worrying about what his cousin thought. Mila came over on Saturday with coffee and boxes to help me finish unpacking my new apartment. I'd been living there for 6 weeks but still had boxes in the closet and pictures leaning against walls. She asked if I was really sure about moving on so fast from a 5-year relationship. She said 6 weeks seemed quick to be dating someone new. I understood why she was worried, but I explained that I didn't emotionally leave Ryan 6 weeks ago. I left him the moment I heard that conversation at Todd's barbecue. I told her I spent 2 months with Ryan after that, going through the motions while feeling completely dead inside. So really it had been almost 4 months since my relationship actually ended in my heart. The official breakup and moving out was just making it legal. Mila nodded slowly and said that made sense when I put it that way. She started pulling dishes out of a box and organizing them in my kitchen cabinets. She kept her back to me while she worked and said she needed to tell me something she should have said years ago. She admitted she never really liked Ryan. She said he always seemed to take me for granted and treated me like I should be grateful he was with me instead of the other way around. She said she watched me do everything for him while he barely noticed I existed half the time. She told me she wanted to say something so many times, but she didn't want to be that friend who trash-talked my boyfriend. She figured I had to see it for myself or I'd just get defensive. Then she turned around and looked at me directly. She said Ethan was completely different from what she'd seen so far. She said he actually listened when I talked and remembered things I said. She told me she'd watched him look at me during the one dinner they'd had together, and he looked at me like I was the most important person in the room. She said that's how someone should look at their partner, and Ryan never once looked at me that way in 5 years. I felt tears starting, but I blinked them back and kept unpacking. 2 days later, Ethan picked me up for dinner. He wouldn't tell me where we were going and just said it was a surprise. We drove across town to this Italian place I'd mentioned wanting to try back when I was still with Ryan. I'd seen it featured in some food blog months ago and told Ryan about it one night while we were eating takeout on the couch. He'd said it looked too expensive and never brought it up again. But Ethan had remembered even though it was just a random comment I'd made in passing. We walked in and the host sat us at a corner table with candles and everything. Ethan ordered wine and asked me about my week. He actually cared about the details of my project at work and asked follow-up questions that showed he was really paying attention. The food came and it was amazing. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. He told me about his time overseas and the places he'd traveled. He asked about my family and seemed genuinely interested in the stories I told about growing up. When the check came, he paid without making a big deal about it. We walked back to his car and I realized this was what being someone's priority actually felt like. And this was what dating someone who saw me as important felt like. Ryan had never once taken me somewhere I specifically wanted to go or remembered random things I mentioned wanting. The next evening I was at my apartment making dinner when someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Ryan standing there. My stomach dropped. I hadn't given him my new address and I had no idea how he got it. I stood frozen trying to decide what to do when I heard Ethan's key in the lock. He'd started keeping some stuff at my place and had his own key. He walked in and saw my face and immediately knew something was wrong. The knocking came again, louder this time. Ethan walked to the door and opened it. Ryan stood there looking surprised to see his cousin. Ethan's voice was completely calm when he told Ryan I didn't want to see him and he needed to leave. Ryan's face got red and he said he just wanted to talk to me. Ethan said no. I'd made it clear we were done and Ryan needed to respect that. Ryan tried to look past Ethan to see me, but Ethan shifted to block his view. Ryan's voice got louder and he said Ethan had no right to keep him from talking to me. Ethan stayed completely calm and said he had every right to protect his girlfriend from her ex who couldn't take no for an answer. Ryan put his hand on the doorframe and tried to push past Ethan into the apartment. Ethan didn't move. He just stood there blocking the whole doorway with his body. He was bigger than Ryan and it was obvious. Ryan tried to push harder, but Ethan didn't budge. His voice was still calm but firm when he told Ryan to back up and leave. Ryan finally stepped back, but he was yelling now. He shouted that this wasn't over and I couldn't hide behind Ethan forever. He said I owed him a conversation after 5 years together. Ethan said I didn't owe Ryan anything, and if he showed up again, we'd call the police. Ryan stood there for another few seconds like he was deciding whether to try again. Then he turned and walked down the hallway toward the stairs. Ethan stayed in the doorway watching until he heard the building door close. Then he shut our door and locked it and put the chain on. He turned around and I was shaking. My hands were trembling and I felt sick. Ethan walked over and pulled me into a hug. I pressed my face against his chest and tried to breathe normally. He held me tight and told me it was okay. Ryan was gone. We stood there for a long time until I stopped shaking. Then we sat on the couch and Ethan said we should think about getting a restraining order if Ryan showed up again. He said Ryan showing up unannounced after I'd made it clear I didn't want contact was not okay. He offered to stay over more often so I wouldn't be alone if Ryan came back. I nodded and leaned against him. 3 days later, Ryan's mom called me. She asked if I was coming to Eric's birthday party that weekend. I hesitated because I knew Ryan would probably be there. She said Ryan wouldn't be coming because she'd uninvited him after Ethan told her about the apartment incident. She said she was embarrassed by her son's behavior, and she wanted me to feel safe at family events. She said Eric specifically wanted me there and the whole family wanted to see me. I agreed to come. The party was at Ryan's parents' house on Saturday afternoon. Ethan and I walked in together and his mom hugged me immediately. His dad came over and shook Ethan's hand and then turned to me. He said he wanted to apologize for Ryan's behavior. He said he'd raised his son better than that, and he was sorry Ryan had scared me at my apartment. Eric's wife came over and welcomed me warmly. She said she was glad I was there and handed me a drink. Throughout the afternoon, different family members went out of their way to talk to me and make me feel included. Ryan's uncle asked about my job. His aunt told me about a book she thought I'd like. Eric thanked me for coming and said it meant a lot that I was still part of family events. Everyone was making it clear they were on my side. Later in the afternoon, Cheryl found me alone in the kitchen refilling my drink. She closed the door and said she wanted to talk to me. I tensed up expecting something bad, but she surprised me by saying she owed me an apology. She admitted she'd been jealous of me when I was dating Ryan. She said their mom had always loved me and talked about me constantly. She said it felt like their mom cared more about me than her own daughter. She told me she knew she'd been cold and sometimes mean because of that jealousy. Then she said something that really shocked me. She said now that I was with Ethan instead of Ryan, she actually wanted to be friends. She explained that we weren't competing for their mom's attention anymore since I wasn't dating her brother. She said she'd been watching me with Ethan and she could tell I was genuinely happy. She asked if we could start over. I said yes. Over the next few weeks, Cheryl and I started meeting for coffee. She was actually funny and smart when she wasn't being defensive. She told me stories about Ryan growing up. She said he'd always been spoiled and entitled. She told me about how their parents gave him everything he wanted and never made him work for anything. She said their mom had always made excuses for his bad behavior. She told me about his past girlfriends and how he'd treated them the same way he treated me. She said she'd watched him string girls along for years before moving on to the next one. Hearing these stories explained so much about Ryan's attitude toward our relationship. He'd never learned that other people's feelings mattered. He'd never had to actually work to keep someone. One afternoon, Ethan came home from work looking serious. He sat down next to me on the couch and said his boss had offered him a big promotion. I got excited until he explained the promotion would make his overseas position permanent. He'd have to move back abroad for at least 3 years. My heart sank. But then he smiled and said he'd already turned it down. He told his boss he'd just gotten back and found something more important than career advancement. He said he wasn't going anywhere. I sat there staring at him while my chest got tight and my eyes started burning. He turned down a huge career move for me. For us. After 5 years with Ryan, who couldn't even commit to a timeline for getting engaged, here was Ethan making me his priority after 6 months. I asked him if he was sure and he pulled me close and said he'd never been more certain about anything in his life. We stayed up late that night talking about actual future plans. He said he wanted to be engaged within a year and married the year after that. He talked about wanting kids eventually and asked what I thought about timelines. He mentioned neighborhoods he'd researched for good schools even though kids were years away. Everything was specific and real, not Ryan's constant someday, and we'll see responses whenever I brought up our future. The next week I started hearing from mutual friends that Ryan was telling people I'd cheated on him with Ethan. He was saying I'd been sneaking around for months while we were still together, and that I'd seduced his cousin to get back at him for something. My friend from work texted me screenshots of what Ryan posted in a group chat with his friends. He made it sound like I was some horrible person who destroyed his family. I felt sick reading the lies, but I didn't want to dignify them with a response. Then Todd texted me out of nowhere asking if we could talk. I was nervous because Todd was Ryan's friend and I figured he believed the lies. We met for coffee and Todd immediately apologized. He said he knew the real timeline because Ryan had told him I broke up clean before anything started with Ethan. He said Ryan was just hurt and lashing out by making up stories. Todd told me he'd already corrected the record with their friend group and told everyone what Ryan actually said at his barbecue about me being just for fun. He said most of the guys felt bad for believing Ryan's version at first. Then Todd surprised me by apologizing for his own part in that conversation. He said he felt guilty for laughing along when Ryan was talking about me like I was temporary. Now but he told me he should have said something right then, instead of being a bystander to his friend disrespecting me. He said he was glad I found out before wasting more years on someone who didn't value me. I thanked him for being honest and for shutting down Ryan's lies. It meant a lot that someone from Ryan's circle was willing to stand up for the truth, even though it meant going against his friend. 3 months into dating Ethan, we took a weekend trip up to this little beach town I'd always wanted to visit. With Ryan, trips were always stressful because he'd plan everything without asking my input, and then get mad if I wanted to change anything. This trip with Ethan was completely different. We decided together where to eat and what to do each day. When I wanted to skip the museum to spend more time at the beach, Ethan just smiled and said that sounded perfect. When he wanted to try this seafood place and I wasn't feeling it, we found somewhere else without any tension. Everything felt easy and natural, like we were actually partners making decisions together. On our last night there, we were sitting on the beach watching the sunset, and Ethan got quiet for a minute. Then he told me he was falling in love with me. He said he'd actually been falling since those first coffee dates when I was still healing from Ryan. He said watching me rebuild my confidence over the past months had been beautiful, and he felt lucky I'd given him a chance despite the complicated family situation. My heart was racing, and I felt tears starting because nobody had ever talked about loving me like that. Ryan said I love you plenty, but it always felt routine, like something you're supposed to say. This felt different. I told Ethan I loved him too, and I meant it in a way I'd never meant it before. With Ryan, I was always trying to earn his commitment and prove I was worth keeping. With Ethan, it felt like partnership and mutual respect. It felt like we were choosing each other every day instead of me chasing someone who was already checked out. We sat on that beach holding each other, and I felt more secure than I had in years. When we got back home, I posted a few photos from the trip and didn't think much about it. 2 days later, I woke up to a long email from Ryan in my inbox. The subject line said, "We need to talk," and my stomach dropped. I opened it, and it was 3 paragraphs about how I never really loved him and just used him for stability. He said I'd probably been planning to leave him for Ethan the whole time, and our entire relationship was a lie. He went on about how I'd manipulated him and wasted his time when he could have been finding someone who actually cared. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The email was copied to his mom, which seemed intentional, like he wanted her to see his version of events. I read it twice and felt angry instead of sad. He was rewriting history to make himself the victim when he was the one who called me temporary and kept me around while waiting for his ex. I didn't respond to Ryan, but I did forward the whole email to his mom with a simple message saying I thought she should see what he was sending. She called me 20 minutes later apologizing again. She said she was going to have a serious talk with her son about moving on and accepting that our relationship was over. She sounded tired and frustrated with Ryan's behavior. A few days later, she texted asking if I wanted to meet for lunch. I said yes, even though I was nervous about what she wanted to discuss. We met at this little cafe and she seemed different from usual, more serious. She told me she'd been going to therapy to deal with guilt about how Ryan turned out. She admitted she'd spoiled him growing up and made excuses for his bad behavior instead of holding him accountable. She said she was trying to do better now, and part of that meant being honest about her mistakes. She told me she was sorry for enabling Ryan's treatment of me, and for not seeing the signs that he wasn't serious about our future. Then she said something that made me start crying. She told me she thought of me as a daughter regardless of which cousin I was dating, and she hoped I'd still come to family events. She said she'd grown to love me over the 5 years I was with Ryan, and that didn't just disappear because we broke up. She said watching me with Ethan made her happy because she could see I was actually valued and respected. I told her I'd love to stay part of the family, and I was so grateful she wasn't shutting me out because of Ryan. Sitting there with her, I realized I wasn't losing a family by leaving Ryan. I was actually gaining one because now they saw me as my own person, instead of just Ryan's girlfriend. A week after that lunch, I started packing up my stuff from the apartment I'd been renting since leaving Ryan. Ethan came over with boxes, and we started talking about finding a place together since we were spending every night at one place or the other anyway. He pulled out his phone and showed me apartment listings he'd already been looking at in neighborhoods on the opposite side of town from where Ryan lived. He said he wanted me to feel safe and not worry about running into Ryan at the grocery store or coffee shop. We spent that evening circling ads and making calls to set up tours for the weekend. The first apartment we saw was too small, and the second one had weird layout issues, but the third place felt right immediately. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a newer building with a doorman at the front desk and security cameras in the lobby. The kitchen had updated appliances, and the living room had big windows that let in tons of natural light. Ethan walked through each room with me and asked what I thought about everything. We stood in the empty bedroom that would be our room, and he said this could be our fresh start. The rent was higher than what I'd been paying, but Ethan said he wanted to cover more of it since he made more money at his job. We sat in his car after the tour and had an actual adult conversation about splitting bills fairly. He pulled up a spreadsheet on his phone showing what he thought made sense based on our incomes. I'd never had a partner treat finances like a team decision before. Ryan always acted like he was doing me a favor by letting me split everything 50-50, even though he made twice what I did. We applied for the apartment that night and got approved 3 days later. I texted Ethan the good news, and he called me immediately saying he'd already started packing his stuff. The next week we were signing the lease and getting keys and planning our move-in date. I posted a photo of the keys on social media without thinking much about it. 2 days before we were supposed to move, someone started pounding on Ethan's apartment door at 9 at night. Ethan looked through the peephole and his whole body went tense. He told me it was Ryan and to stay in the bedroom. I heard him open the door, and Ryan's voice came through loud and angry, asking if it was true we were moving in together. Ethan's voice stayed calm, saying that wasn't Ryan's business anymore. Ryan got louder, asking how Ethan could betray family like this and calling him a snake. Ethan said Ryan needed to leave right now or he was calling the police. Ryan kept yelling about how I'd turned his own cousin against him and ruined his life. Ethan repeated that he was calling the cops, and I heard him actually dial. Ryan's voice got even louder, saying Ethan betrayed the whole family and he'd never forgive either of us. Then I heard footsteps stomping away and a door slam. Ethan came back into the bedroom and sat down on the bed next to me. His face looked sad in a way I hadn't seen before. I realized this whole situation was costing him too, even though he never complained about losing his relationship with Ryan. I took his hand and told him if he wanted to try fixing things with his cousin, I'd understand and support whatever he needed to do. Ethan shook his head and said there was nothing to fix because Ryan was just mad about facing consequences for his own choices. He said family didn't mean accepting disrespect, and Ryan needed to grow up. We sat there quiet for a minute and then went back to packing boxes. Moving day came, and Ethan's brother Eric showed up with a truck he'd borrowed. Ryan's mom came too with her husband, and they helped carry furniture and boxes up to our new place. She brought a housewarming gift. This nice set of kitchen towels with a card saying she was happy for us. Having his family there making it clear they supported us meant everything. We got everything moved in one day and spent that night eating pizza on the floor surrounded by boxes. Over the next few weeks, we unpacked and made the apartment feel like home. I hung pictures and Ethan assembled furniture, and we argued about where the couch should go. It felt easy and natural in a way living with Ryan never had. I stopped hearing from Ryan directly, but mutual friends told me he'd been going on dates with different women every week. They said he was posting photos trying to show how great his life was without me. It didn't bother me at all because I was actually happy and not thinking about him anymore. 4 months passed, and Ethan suggested we host a dinner party to celebrate having our own place. We invited Mila and some of my other friends, plus Eric and Ryan's parents and Cheryl. I spent the day cooking while Ethan cleaned and set up the dining room. People started arriving around 6, and the apartment filled up with conversation and laughter. Mila pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was checking on the roast and told me she'd never seen me this relaxed and happy in a relationship. She said with Ryan I always seemed like I was trying to prove something, but with Ethan I just seemed like myself. Cheryl showed up late with a guy she introduced as her boyfriend of 2 months. She told everyone at dinner that watching my relationship with Ethan had inspired her to demand better treatment from the men she dated. Her boyfriend seemed nice and kept his arm around her chair while they talked. After everyone left and we were cleaning up, Ethan and I collapsed on the couch exhausted but satisfied. The next morning, Ryan's mom called and asked if we were coming to Thanksgiving at her house. She said Ryan would be there too, but she expected everyone to act like adults and be civil. Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table discussing whether we were ready for that level of family drama. He said we shouldn't let Ryan control our lives by avoiding family events. I agreed but felt nervous about being in the same room with Ryan after everything that happened. We decided we'd go, but leave immediately if Ryan started anything. So Ethan promised his brother would run interference if needed. I marked Thanksgiving on the calendar and tried not to think too much about how awkward it would be. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up with my stomach in knots and Ethan brought me coffee in bed while I tried to decide what to wear. He sat on the edge of the mattress and reminded me that we could leave any time if things got uncomfortable. His brother Eric called around 10 to say he'd be there early and would keep Ryan occupied if needed. We got dressed and drove to his parents' house with a store-bought pie because I'd been too nervous to bake. Cars already filled the driveway when we arrived and I recognized Ryan's truck parked near the garage. Ethan squeezed my hand before we got out and carried the pie while I walked beside him up to the front door. His mom answered and hugged us both, thanking us for coming and whispering that everything would be fine. Inside the house smelled like turkey and stuffing and family members filled the living room talking and laughing. Ryan sat on the couch with his dad watching football, and he glanced up when we walked in, but immediately looked back at the television. Eric came over and clapped Ethan on the shoulder, asking if we wanted drinks from the kitchen. We followed him, and I felt myself relax slightly being away from the main room. Cheryl was in there mashing potatoes and she smiled when she saw me, saying she was glad I came. The afternoon passed slowly with everyone making small talk and pretending the tension wasn't there. Ryan stayed quiet during dinner and barely looked in our direction when passing dishes. He sat at the opposite end of the table and focused on his food while conversation flowed around him. After we finished eating, his mom pulled me aside into the hallway and told me Ryan had been seeing a therapist for the past month. She said he was working through his feelings about the breakup and learning to accept that I'd moved on. I felt relieved hearing that he was getting help instead of just staying angry. She hugged me and said she hoped eventually family gatherings would feel normal again for everyone. Later that evening, after most people had gone home, Ryan found me alone in the kitchen putting away leftovers. He stood in the doorway for a minute before asking if we could talk privately. My heart started racing, but I nodded and followed him out to the back porch where it was cold and quiet. He shoved his hands in his pockets and stared at the ground before finally speaking. He said he was sorry for how he treated me during our relationship, and especially after the breakup. He admitted he took me for granted and never appreciated what we had until it was gone. He said he understood why I left, even though it hurt watching me with Ethan. His voice cracked a little when he mentioned his cousin's name, and I could tell this conversation was hard for him. He said his therapist was helping him see how his obsession with the past had ruined his present. He looked at me then and said he knew we couldn't be friends, but he hoped I could forgive him eventually. I told him I accepted his apology, but I needed him to respect my boundaries going forward. I said I didn't want awkward encounters or weird tension at family events anymore. He agreed and said he was trying to move on with his life, and hoped someday the family gatherings wouldn't feel so uncomfortable. We stood there in silence for a moment and then went back inside separately. Ethan was waiting in the living room and he searched my face when I sat down next to him. I told him later in the car what Ryan had said, and Ethan seemed relieved that his cousin was finally dealing with things properly. Christmas and New Year's passed more smoothly after that conversation with Ryan. He showed up to family events but kept his distance and acted civil when we had to interact. I stopped watching for his reactions every time Ethan touched me or we laughed together. His mom hosted a New Year's dinner and Ryan even made a joke that included both of us without any bitterness in his voice. Ethan noticed the change in me and told me one night that he was proud of how I handled everything with grace. He said watching me navigate the family drama while staying kind had made him fall even more in love with me. January came and life settled into a comfortable routine in our apartment. We both went back to work after the holidays and fell into easy patterns of cooking dinner together and watching shows on the couch. But then Ethan started acting slightly different in ways I couldn't quite pinpoint. He'd take phone calls in the bedroom with the door closed and got protective of his laptop when I walked by. A few times I caught him quickly closing browser tabs when I came into the room. My stomach would drop every time it happened because it reminded me of how Ryan used to act secretive about checking his ex's social media. But I forced myself to trust Ethan and not let Ryan's behavior poison this relationship. I didn't snoop through his phone or demand to know who he was talking to. I chose to believe that Ethan had earned my trust over these months together. 2 weeks into January, Ethan told me to dress nice because he was taking me out to dinner. He seemed nervous getting ready and kept checking his phone, which was unusual for him since he usually ignored it when we were together. We drove to the same restaurant where we'd had our first official date back when I was freshly single and scared to start over. He held my hand across the table but seemed distracted during our meal. He kept glancing at his phone and I started to worry something was wrong. After we finished our main courses, he excused himself to the bathroom and was gone for almost 10 minutes. When he came back, the waiter brought out dessert, even though we hadn't ordered any. Ethan barely touched his chocolate cake and instead watched me eat mine with this intense look on his face. I asked if he was okay, and he said he was perfect, but his voice shook a little. Then suddenly he pushed his chair back and got down on one knee right there in the restaurant. My fork clattered onto my plate and I felt my whole body freeze. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket and opened it to show me a ring. He started saying he knew it had only been 6 months, but he'd never been more sure of anything in his life. He said I deserved someone who saw me as their forever from day one, and he wanted to be that person for me. I was crying before he even finished talking and saying yes over and over while he slid the ring onto my finger. The whole restaurant started clapping and the couple at the next table raised their glasses to us. I realized sitting there with tears running down my face that this was what I thought I'd have with Ryan after 5 years of waiting. But Ethan was giving it to me after 6 months because he was actually sure about us, and didn't need years to figure out what he wanted. The ring fit perfectly, and I could tell he'd put real thought into choosing it based on things I'd mentioned liking. It had a simple band with a round stone that caught the light when I moved my hand. Ethan paid the bill quickly, and we left the restaurant with me still staring at my ring in disbelief. In the car, he admitted he'd been planning this for weeks, and that's why he'd been so secretive. He said he'd gotten approval from my parents when he visited them last month, supposedly for work. He'd also asked his parents and even called Mila to make sure the timing felt right, and I was ready for this step. Hearing that he'd put so much care into planning everything made me cry all over again. We drove home and I kept looking at the ring on my finger, thinking about how different this felt from all those years of dropping hints to Ryan about marriage. Ethan had wanted this as much as I did, and hadn't needed me to convince him or wait for the perfect moment. He'd just known and acted on it because that's who he was. We sat in the car outside the restaurant and Ethan pulled out his phone to start making calls. He called his parents first and put them on speaker, so I could hear their excited reactions. His mom started crying happy tears, and his dad congratulated us both, saying he knew Ethan had been planning something special. They asked when we were thinking about the wedding, and Ethan squeezed my hand while saying we hadn't gotten that far yet, but probably within the year. Next, I called my parents and my mom screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She demanded to see the ring immediately, and I promised to send pictures as soon as we hung up. My dad got on the line and told Ethan he better take good care of me, but his voice was warm and happy. Then Ethan called Ryan's mom because she was basically his aunt, and had always been close to his side of the family. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the smile in her voice when Ethan told her the news. She congratulated us both and said she was thrilled. Then there was this pause that stretched too long. She cleared her throat and mentioned she would need to tell Ryan, and I felt my stomach drop even though I'd known this was coming. Ethan told her not to worry about it and that we understood it might be awkward for Ryan to hear. She said she'd handle it sensitively, and we shouldn't let Ryan's reaction ruin our engagement night. After we hung up, Ethan kissed me and said everything was going to be fine. We drove home and I kept looking at the ring on my finger, trying not to think about how Ryan would take the news. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Ryan that just said, "Congratulations and hope you're both happy." It seemed genuine even though I could feel the sadness behind it. I showed Ethan and he read it without much reaction, just nodded and said that was mature of Ryan. A few days later, Ryan's mom called me directly, which surprised me since I figured she'd keep some distance now that I was marrying Ethan instead of her son. She asked how I was doing and if wedding planning had started yet. We talked for a while and then she mentioned that Ryan was actually dating someone new, and it seemed pretty serious. She said he'd been in therapy and was working on himself, and meeting this new girl had helped him move forward. I felt this weight lift off my chest hearing that because I'd been carrying guilt about moving on so fast. Knowing Ryan had found someone too made everything feel less complicated. She told me not to feel bad about any of it, and that sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to. Wedding planning started the next week, and it was completely different from what I'd imagined it would be like with Ryan. Ethan actually had opinions about things like the venue and the food and the music. He sat with me looking through options and gave real feedback instead of just saying whatever I wanted was fine. When we disagreed about something, we talked it through and found middle ground without either of us getting upset. He wanted a smaller wedding focused on close family and friends, and I agreed because big weddings had never been my thing anyway. We picked a date 6 months out, which felt fast, but also felt right since we'd already been living together. Ethan helped me make lists and call vendors and never once complained about wedding planning being boring or too much. He got excited about details like the cake flavors and what songs we'd dance to. I kept thinking about how Ryan used to change the subject whenever I brought up wedding stuff, and how different this felt. 2 months into planning, Cheryl called me and asked if we could meet for coffee. I figured she wanted to talk about the wedding or maybe give me advice about marrying into the family. We met at our usual spot and she seemed nervous, stirring her coffee without drinking it. Finally, she asked if I'd already picked my bridesmaids because she wanted to know if I'd consider having her in the wedding party. I just stared at her for a second because I honestly hadn't expected that. She said she knew it might be weird since she was Ryan's sister, but we'd become real friends over the past months, and she wanted to be part of my day. I told her yes before I even really thought about it, because she was right. We had become friends. She hugged me right there in the coffee shop and said she was so happy. Walking back to my car, I realized that having Ryan's sister as my bridesmaid felt like proof that I'd gained a family instead of losing one. The whole situation could have torn the family apart, but instead I was closer to them than ever. Ryan's mom insisted on throwing me a bridal shower even though I told her she didn't have to. She said she'd been planning my shower in her head for years, and she wasn't going to miss out just because I was marrying Ethan instead of Ryan. She invited both sides of the family and some of my friends, and the day of the shower I was nervous about how everyone would mix. Ryan didn't come, which I'd expected, but he sent a really nice gift with a card that wished me happiness. Everyone at the shower kept commenting on how mature he was being about everything and how much he'd grown. My friends from work were there, and Cheryl and some of Ethan's cousins, and it felt like my two lives blending together. We played the usual shower games and opened presents, and I felt surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. Ryan's mom gave a little speech about how she'd always thought of me as a daughter, and that wasn't changing just because of how things worked out. She said she was grateful I was staying in the family, and she couldn't wait to officially call me her daughter-in-law. Near the end of the shower, Ryan's grandmother pulled me aside into the kitchen. She was this tiny old woman who didn't talk much at family dinners but always watched everything with sharp eyes. She took my hand and told me she'd known from that very first dinner that Ryan didn't appreciate me enough. She said she'd watched how I helped her with her walker without being asked, and how I made sure she had everything she needed, and she'd thought then that Ryan was lucky. But she'd also noticed that he never looked at me the way Ethan did. She said Ethan looked at me the way her husband had looked at her, and that's how you know it's real love. She squeezed my hand and said she was glad I'd found that kind of love, even if it took a complicated path to get there. I hugged her and tried not to cry because her words meant more than she probably knew. The wedding day arrived 6 months after Ethan proposed. We'd picked a small venue with room for about 70 people, just close family and friends. I got ready with my bridesmaids, including Cheryl, and my mom kept crying every time she looked at me in my dress. The ceremony was short and simple, the kind of wedding I'd always actually wanted. Both families sat together without any tension, and I could see Ryan's mom in the front row wiping her eyes. When Ethan and I said our vows, I felt completely sure about everything. No doubts or worries. He promised to always choose me first, and to never make me question my place in his life. I promised to trust him and build a real partnership together. After we kissed and walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, I caught Ryan's mom openly crying happy tears. She hugged both of us afterward and said it was the most beautiful ceremony she'd ever seen. The reception was relaxed and fun, nothing fancy or stressful. Ryan showed up with his girlfriend, a nice woman who seemed good for him. They sat at a table with some of his friends and seemed comfortable together. During the cocktail hour, Ryan came up to us and congratulated Ethan, shaking his hand and actually seeming sincere about it. He told me I looked beautiful and that he hoped we'd be happy together. His girlfriend stood next to him smiling, and I could tell she knew the whole story but wasn't bothered by it. They left early, saying they wanted to give us space to celebrate, and I appreciated that gesture. After they left, I felt like I could finally relax completely and just enjoy being married. Ethan and I danced and ate cake and talked to everyone, and it felt perfect in a simple, real way. Our honeymoon was 2 weeks in Hawaii, something we'd planned together based on places we both wanted to see. We spent days on the beach and hiking and trying new restaurants, and it was the most relaxed I'd ever felt. Ethan told me one night while we were watching the sunset that he felt like the luckiest man alive. He said he'd never imagined when he came back from overseas that he'd end up married to me, but now he couldn't imagine any other life. I realized sitting there that I felt exactly the same way. I felt lucky that I'd overheard that conversation at Todd's barbecue, because without it I might have stayed with Ryan for years more. I felt lucky that I'd had the courage to leave and start over. And I felt lucky that Ethan had seen something in me worth pursuing, even when it complicated his family relationships. We came back from the honeymoon to our apartment, and real married life started. Nothing felt dramatically different since we'd already been living together, but somehow everything felt more solid. Ethan kept being attentive and considerate like he always had been, asking about my day and helping with chores and planning date nights. I watched him unpack from the honeymoon and put his clothes away, and I thought about how this was what partnership actually looked like. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about someone consistently showing up and choosing you and making you feel valued every single day. Ryan had taught me what I didn't want, and Ethan was showing me what I deserved. I felt confident about our future together in a way I'd never felt before, and I knew this was just the beginning of building something real. 3 months after the honeymoon, Mila called me screaming that she was engaged. Her boyfriend proposed at the beach where they had their first date, and she couldn't stop talking about how perfect it was. She asked if I'd be her maid of honor, and I said yes immediately, already tearing up on the phone. We met for coffee the next day to start planning, and she grabbed my hand across the table and told me I inspired her to stop settling. She said watching me leave Ryan and find someone who actually prioritized me made her realize she deserved the same thing. She'd been dating guys who treated her like an option for years, and after seeing my situation, she finally demanded better. Her fiancé was someone who made her feel valued from day one, just like Ethan did for me. I hugged her and said I was so happy she found her person. 2 weeks later, Ryan's mom called and invited Ethan and me to a family dinner at her house. She said she had an announcement to make and wanted everyone there. We showed up on Saturday, and the whole family was gathered in the dining room. Ryan was there with his girlfriend, a woman named Jessica who seemed nice enough. His mom stood up after we finished eating and clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. She announced that Ryan and Jessica got engaged last weekend, and everyone started clapping and congratulating them. Ryan looked genuinely happy. Not forced or fake like I'd worried he might. Jessica was beaming and showing off her ring to Ryan's grandmother. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized I felt relieved more than anything. The family dynamic finally felt balanced, with both cousins engaged and moving forward with their lives. Nobody was stuck in the past or holding on to hurt feelings. After dinner, Ryan approached me in the kitchen while I was refilling my water glass. He asked how married life was treating me, and I told him it was great, that Ethan and I were really happy. He said that was good to hear and he was glad we worked out. I asked about Jessica and he lit up talking about her, explaining how they met at his gym and connected over their love of hiking. He seemed genuinely content, not bitter or resentful like he'd been at our wedding. We talked for maybe 5 minutes about normal stuff like jobs and apartment hunting, since he and Jessica were looking for a place together. It felt like we'd both finally moved past the hurt and anger. I was grateful we could exist in the same family space without tension or awkwardness. When Ethan and I left that night, I told him it felt like closure in a weird way, seeing Ryan happy with someone else. Our first anniversary came up faster than I expected. Ethan surprised me by taking me back to that coffee shop where we'd met up alone for the first time when I was still with Ryan. We sat at the same table by the window and ordered the same drinks we'd had that day. He held my hand and reminded me that he'd fallen in love with me over coffee before we even started dating officially. He said watching me talk about my work presentation that day, seeing how passionate I was about my career, made him realize I was someone special. I told him I was grateful every day that I gave him a chance despite how complicated it was with Ryan. Life turned out so much better than I ever imagined it could when I was standing in Todd's kitchen hearing my relationship fall apart around me. I wouldn't change anything about how it all happened, because it led me here, to this coffee shop, with someone who saw me as his forever from the very beginning. That's how it went for me. But I know some of you would have handled it totally differently. Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading through them later.